Okay, so first thing I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna talk about the role of pork on this map. So we'll just load in the commanders and pause. So the thing with pork is that if you build a bunch of pork here, like you spend 500 metal on LLTs over here, then they can spend 500 metal on army and push around this way and completely bypass the pork. That's the problem with pork. Or even instead of attacking you, then they just attack you and then everything's going on to your ally and you don't have units that, because the pork's all over here and it can't move. So that's the big issue with pork that you have to be aware of. But the benefit with pork is that it's more efficient. And so if you can spend, say, 500 metal on pork here, potentially, and sit if you also have an army here, that means that he has to defend both here and here because you can go either way. But if you go down the hill this way, then he can't come up the hill with his army there. Because he could try, but your metal is say you spend 300 metal on the pork here, you can spend 700 metal on the army. He has to have 700 metal worth of army there and 700 metal worth of army there, and overall you've spent less than him. And so that's the utility of pork. So both the weakness and utility. So you want to have a lot more in units, but you also want to pork. Pork is especially good in places that are closer to their base or that are going to restrict movement. So putting pork somewhere like in this gap, being a choke point, that because that's the only way they can get from either side of the map. They're going to want to go through that, so it's going to be a lot more effective going through that gap overall. And so you can kind of look at this map and go, it's like, okay, where do you want to build pork? Well, if you can push up to here and get a bunch of pork here, that would be awesome. If we and like just or pork this gap, it's there's a lot of flexibility, and so here's a target for somewhere we want to get to, and be able to pork. If we can get up to here and put but the other thing with those locations is not just pork, but if you can put pork and an army there, then not only can't they go through there if your army goes either way, your army can go either way. So you need both and they need to work together. But pork in any location isn't necessarily good. So let's speed ahead a bit and think about if you are going to just try to rush out however many units you want. Firstly, there are a couple minor things that we can do here. You've had to walk a bit between building those wind generators in that factory. Yes, exactly. But you don't just want to use pork to protect you. You want to use pork to protect you and block them if you at all can. So it's a combination. Pork can be used sort of as a weapon. So you've spent a little bit of walking time in there, which is a little minor. But then the important thing that happens here is that you build this lab, play, and then you walk your comm away. Compared to Marcel, who's just sat there with his commander and his guarders guarding his lab. So you walking away, and you've left 430 metal stored, and you're gaining metal, so you're not only not spending your resources, you're really not spending your resources, and you're not increasing your ability to spend them. So the idea of like build units kind of starts to fall apart when you actually don't build units. As a general rule of thumb, I don't walk away from my factory unless I have at least one constructor there, because that halves the time it takes to build anything out of the factory, and halving the time is absolutely huge. And it's less and less return beyond that point. It is return, definitely, but it's proportionally a lesser return. So that's what happens when he's got a unit coming in and it's a stronger unit than yours, and you haven't completed your constructor, and so you haven't been able to put out any units to counter it. And then it proceeds to raid you. What I would have done here is I would have put these right on the lab and finished that flash as soon as possible. Your commander is not going to catch up with that, so you need something fast like a flash or like a couple Jeffy to take it out. And so that's one of the situations where you're going to start thinking about, there's pause. So he's got units coming in, you've got very little resources and very little ability to build units of your own. And so in order to bring this back to parity, remember how pork is more metal efficient? As soon as you start falling behind in units and he starts pushing units in order to just stay alive, because staying alive is your first call of order, you put metal into pork and you start porking this off. Two things. One, it's a hill, so units are slower coming up the hill. Two, it's a hill. You've got a slightly longer range going down the hill, I believe. Although it's a laser weapon, so maybe not. But you've got, being at the top of the hill, you've got an advantage of that. Plus you've got the natural metal advantage of it being pork. So you place a bunch of pork up the top of the hill and he can't come in. And that allows you to buy a little time to get the ball rolling. You would have to assume as part of that your allies notice this and also start playing a little conservatively, because by you getting behind, the entire team's behind, and so if they don't play like that, the behindness is just going to compound. And that's what you see with Tiger J later, because he also didn't play more conservatively like you. That lets later Marcel walk units in and take out his base. So again here you've got this constructor over here building energy and nothing on the lab, nothing building units to combat with Marcel's units. So it's the same thing over again. That was good there, keeping the units. Now here, what you'll notice is when you're coming out towards their base, this is right where they're producing units, and when you move towards it, so you're moving towards where they produce units, which means you're going to be hitting their new units faster. When you So what you want to do when your army's low on health and you're right near the base, you probably don't want to keep moving forward. What you probably want to do is move back, collect your reinforcements, possibly also bring your commander to them, repair them, and then you can keep going. Part of that is you don't want to be attacking this mechs up there all the way up near his base. This over here had an LLT and a mechs, exactly the same as that LLT and a mechs. And you could have taken it and been further away from his army. Not only would you be further away from his army, the metal that is left behind when you attack it would be further away from his army, which means you'd be more likely to reclaim it. Thirdly, the metal extractor the metal patch would be further away from his army and up on top of a hill, so that it's easier for your commander to get there, build the metal extractor, and then defend it. So a bunch of things to be thinking about there. Yeah, it's good that you've brought that flashback now, but should have brought it back earlier. And here in the base, this should help this constructor before building a nano. So a nano takes 5,000 build power to build. Okay, that's the problem. So firstly, when you get out a constructor, what happens when you get out a constructor is you halve the build time. You halve the time then it takes to get the nano. So you want to get that second constructor out as soon as possible, because it halves the time of building anything outside the lab, and that's the greatest time saving you can get. So instead of going over there and reclaiming that, because it's in your base, it's safe, and you've got plenty of metal, first thing you do is you repair that, you finish this nano, so that you've got both constructors on. So you don't leave your lab until you've got one constructor out, because that halves the time it takes to build anything. Then you don't build anything with your constructors until you have 2 of those constructors out, so that it halves the time it takes for any of those constructors to build anything. And it's just that huge saving that you get. Yeah. There's one more thing I wanted to point out in this replay for you. So right here, when you've got these AKs coming in, let's assume it's 1 AK for each of the half health flash. It's 2 AKs for the full health flash. It's 3 AKs for the LLT. And then it's about 7-8 AKs for the commander. Not only that, in this, so this is about an even army you've got here, and you just walk away from the fight is what happens. What you should do is you should stick each of the commander, LLT, and the flash right here, so that they all start firing at the enemy at about the same time. Or not so they start firing, so that the commander can go a little bit forward, because it outranges the AK, and then it comes back. What you want to do is you want to maximize the amount of time that the enemy is not firing, but you want to maximize the number of units you've got firing at any one time. So instead of letting this LLT defend for itself, you form a line here, because armies are roughly equal, and you take it on. But instead what you do is you let it go. The other thing is because it was a line, if you move forward towards it, that allows you to open up the opportunity of degunning sideways and taking out half the army in one degun. Here, again, because you've got so much metal, what you should be doing is you should be repairing them. That's a huge army here. Also, again, here, what you're doing is you're building eco here with a huge army in front of your base. What they should be doing is they should be focusing on the lab and getting eco. Also, the other thing your commander could be doing instead of reclaiming or repairing is he could be building another LLT. Or finally, what you can do is is if you do think you're going to be losing the battle, if they do have sufficient AKs that you're going to lose, what you do is you pull all the way back to the top of this hill, because you've got an LT there, plus as he moves forwards, he's going to not have reinforcements, and you're going to have your reinforcements coming in from the lab. It'll, if you were out of, and which you're not, because it takes so much energy to build an advanced solar, so you do have enough energy to be building units. That allows you to build up a bunch of units, him to potentially come up, overextend, and then you can fight a winning battle. Building wind would be more efficient than advanced solar. It's probably not so much about building winds being more efficient, so much as you've got an army outside your base which you need to do something about. You can't worry about building eco until you've got rid of that army, because the eco's not going to fight your battle. You need something that can shoot and keep you alive. And we'll just watch through the end of the game. In this situation, he's got so many AKs now, they're starting to bunch up. Janus would be a very useful unit for taking that on. Stumpies are okay, but if we look at the damage per second of a Stumpy, for the cost, the Stumpy costs, Stout, sorry. The Stout costs about double a Flash, and has less damage per second. It makes up a little bit of that in area of effect, but he's probably going to spread out those AKs, so your mileage may vary. And the assuming no area of effect bonus damage, then yeah, assuming no bonus damage from area of effect, the difference in damage per second far outweighs the extra range that the Stumpy has and the extra health, because 2 Flash will have 240% more damage, while 2 Flash will have or a Stumpy will have maybe 30-40% more health than 2 Blitz. They're not Flash, they're Blitz. Janus gets a lot of extra. It's got about the same damage per second and is a little more expensive than the Stout. But the Janus's benefit is it has high burst damage, which means a bunch of their units won't fire at all. And it has a bunch of area effect. So, because it's like 3 times the area effect of a Stumpy, it can potentially do like it'll do more than 3 times as much damage as the Stumpy if they're bunched together. So it does have significantly less health, So what you can do is you can set it a little bit behind. What if you just spam flashes? Personally, that's what I would have done. Spamming flash also allows you, once you win this battle, to then potentially rush down here and help Tiger J, who's in a bit of trouble. But spamming flash and maybe putting out one Janus, maybe just one or two, is what I would have done. Okay, you can see here that by setting the flash there in front of your LLTs, the AKs could stand a little further back. If they were further forward, it would have given you just a little bit more time for your LLTs to do just a little bit more damage. Plus, the further away the AKs are from the LLTs, the less damage the LLTs do, because they're lasers. Lasers fall off like that. So if you brought your flash such that they were right in line with your LLTs, that would have been the best lineup you could have done there. It probably wouldn't have won you the battle because you had such a smaller army. But it would have increased your efficiency. The other thing it would have done is if a bunch of his units also fire at your LLTs and commander instead of the flash, it keeps the flash alive for a little longer. So it may even be worth putting the flash a little bit behind. Okay. You don't want the flash to die before the LLTs, because an LLT has about the same health as the flash, but about 60-50% more damage per second. So you do want the flash to be shot before they shoot the LLTs, but you want the LLTs to maybe get to half damage before the flash die. Just so the flash can stay alive a little longer. The other thing is your commander has a full 2,600 health. That's about, say, 2,500 health that it can sink into the commander before you need to have them stop shooting at the commander. It'll take a lot of practice to work out how to do that without just straight up losing your commander and taking everything out. But if you can get them to fire at your commander but not kill your commander, 2,500 health is about as much as it would need to keep 4 flashes alive for however long it takes them to deal that damage. That's a huge amount of extra damage you can deal if you can just force them to sink some more damage into your commander. So yeah. And then here, that's another thing, wrong button. Your constructor, if you saw, was building nanos as these AKs were coming in. What you should do when you have things like AKs coming in, again, defenses are more efficient than units, and nanos can't shoot at all. What you do is you get everything just building LLTs right near the nanos, so that it takes as long as possible to get to them, but then they'll protect the nanos, so the nanos can like repair the LLTs, or they can help build more LLTs. You don't want the nanos to die. But if you put the build power into LLTs, then you can, a nano is 5,000, it costs 5,000 build power. An LLT costs 2. In the time it took you to almost build that third nano, you could have built 2 LLTs, which maybe could have bought you time to build a third LLT. With this number of AKs that made it through, you're probably still gonna die, but it would still have been a better option. And then your nanos can repair those LLTs further than just building them, which also buys you a little extra time, so maybe. But yeah, unfortunately the game's pretty much over. This commander as well, the instant it gets here, reclaim just a little bit and start throwing up LLTs. It needs to be putting up defense ASAP. And from here, it's basically game over. Because what happens next is you lose your commander. So yeah, GG. Bot or vehicle. Okay, most maps you can't go wrong by starting bots and then going vehicles. I personally would go bots. The huge benefit of vehicles is typically their speed and their range. And a little bit their health. But they're not good in narrow spaces, because if they have to stop and turn around, that means they get slow, which means it's hard for them to dodge. We don't have any vehicles on the map, unfortunately. So vehicles kind of struggle in a narrow area like this. Also, it's also more of a thing of bots are slow, but they do a lot more damage per second for the cost. Actually, that's not entirely true. They do more damage per second for the cost if you have Thug. That's not necessarily entirely true either. Interesting. Huh. Maybe it's how many you can put in a small area then. Or maybe it's just how slow they operate from a stop. Because vehicles, it's like if they stop, they're dead basically, because they can't move quickly. Vehicles are probably a fine option here, to be honest. Because a Stumpy costs 320. No, 225. And an aggravator costs 110. This is how flat the map is. So yes, it's flat enough for vehicles, but it's not necessarily open enough for vehicles. Because they take so long to turn around, that can make it very hard if they don't have somewhere to run away to in the straight line they're already going. So if you're going this way, then when they get to the edge, they'll basically stop there and be super vulnerable to being surrounded or picked off or whatever before they can make it back around. And that's the disadvantage of vehicles and why it's so painful to micro them in an enclosed area, because they just take so long to turn around. For damage efficiency, they're actually pretty close. The aggravator will outrange the Stumpy, and the Thug is the same range, but a Thug is probably a better equivalent to a Stumpy, it's just slower. It probably has a little more damage and a little more health for the same cost, maybe. It might be about equal. Yeah. So, that was this game, and all of the things you could have done better. Yeah. GG.